All right, so we've been talking about for the year finding our footing, looking at the idea of the pursuit of God, and the finding our footing is about positioning, trying to position ourselves into the ideal environment, ideal places, so that we can make the most impact on people. And we've been talking then the last month about walking in fellowship with each other. So this is where we are, and we're going to continue this. Next week we're going to look at a little bit different shift in focus, but it's all coming from the daily Bible reading. The idea that I wanted to think about is that we leave no one behind. So if we're looking at what we can do in the community and how we can grow, we're going to have to grow together in unity, which we talked quite a bit about. In order for us to be effective, we have to be united. And of course, that starts with love, and that starts with trying our best to model the instructions and the practices of the people of the church in the New Testament, so that we can be the kind of people that God wants us to become. And then, as we're reaching out into the community, we have to take care of each other to make sure that we are walking together so that we don't lose each other, right? We don't want to have anybody left behind. We want to try to take everyone with us. And there's only so much that we can do when it comes down to that, right? I mean, we do our best to help people see truth, to walk along with the truth, and to stay with us, but ultimately, people make their own decisions. Our job is to help them make sure that they make the right decisions, that at least have the information they need so they can make the best decisions in following God. And that's kind of what I want to look at, the idea of standing together in uncompromising unity, that we don't compromise truth just because it's not popular or just because it may be inconvenient for us or whatever. We have to continue on teaching the truth. And when I talk about uncompromising unity, sometimes the word uncompromising can have a negative connotation, right? That is, the image kind of comes up of someone who is staunch, who never budges on anything. That's not the idea that I want to present or adopt. There are certain things that we should never budge on, but there are also things that we need to recognize that could be matters of opinion. And we also need to be gracious in the way we deal with one another, so that we stand strong, but we do it in a gracious fashion, so that we're not intentionally offending people, running them off. They will be offended by truth no matter what, but we're trying to do the best that we can to make sure we're not in the way of them getting the truth. And it's simply the fact that they are offended by the truth, if that so happens to be the case. Well, looking at the themes, Joshua, the rest of Joshua from chapter 7 all the way to Judges chapter 1, there's several themes that come up that relate to what we're talking about. And we have in here the consequences of disobedience and the importance of repentance. That's definitely there. God's faithfulness in giving Israel victory over their enemies. The importance of wholly following God and avoiding compromise. We have the renewal of the covenant between God and Israel. We have the division of the promised land among the tribes of Israel, and the importance of standing together and supporting one another. And that's something that may not be as easily seen in the scriptures here, where it doesn't point that out directly, but it certainly has the implication that they're supposed to be supportive of one another and help each other in this process. And there's lots of pieces of evidence for that in there. In the first couple of chapters, chapters 7 and 8, we have the loss of the battle at Ai because of Achan's sin, and they defeated Ai only after dealing with the sin that was there in the camp. What was Achan's sin? Do you remember? He took. You say what? Yeah, he took things from the battle at Jericho, and God said, "This place is wholly dedicated to destruction. Don't touch anything. Don't take anything with you." And he saw silver and gold and some kind of a garment from Babylon, and took them for himself and hid them in his tent. And they went and fought Ai, and they were, quote unquote, routed. They were beaten. They only lost a few men, but they were all terrified. They all ran away, and they didn't understand what was going on. You remember how that Joshua went in and he fell down before the holiest of holies, I guess, or before the tabernacle, and was asking God, what happened, right? And God said, get up and stop praying. You got sin that you need to deal with. And so he told him they went through all this process and found Achan, and he confessed what he had done. And then they went and fought again after they cleansed Israel of the sin, killing him and his whole family. They went and fought again and won. And this was actually, they used the same tactic of running, looking like they were scared, to draw the Gibeonites, to draw them, Aians, to draw them out. And they were able to defeat them that way. Then we have chapters 9 through 12 where Israel makes a treaty with the Gibeonites, and they also had to battle several Canaanite kings who aligned against Israel, and that relates to the Gibeonites too. The Gibeonites, remember, came and they presented themselves as if they'd come from a long way off, and they'd heard the great things of kind of stroking the ego a little bit. We've heard from so far away that you're such a great nation and your God is with you. So we came and said, surely you're going to conquer this land, and then you're going to have to come and conquer us. And we want to make sure you don't do that. So let's make a treaty. And Joshua thinking, no big deal. I mean, they're not from here anyway. They presented them, their bread is all moldy, and it's a big con job. And they tricked them into listening, and they agreed to create a treaty. And it says that they didn't consult God on that. He would have told them very quickly what was going on. So now they have a situation where they had to honor a promise that they had made to these pagan people that they were supposed to be driving out of the area. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. Then we have chapters 13 through 22, the division of the promised land among the tribes. There's more details that are given. And then chapters 23 and 24, Joshua gives a farewell address, and he charged them to remain faithful to God and renewed the covenant that they had with God before his death. He's reminding them, this is the covenant that you have. And then chapter 1 of Judges talks about the land, the fight for the land after Joshua's death, and the successes and failures of tribes in driving out the remaining Canaanites. It's summarized pretty well. So that's where we are. That's the reading. Does anybody have any questions about any of the texts that we read? Things came up, or maybe something stood out that you wanted to talk about? All right, so this is going to be the overview. These things came out to me in talking about this. Some points here. Sin is a critical concern in the church. And of course, we know that, right? It erodes the morality and the thinking of the members. This is some direct application from the text. It's amazing to me how much sin can have an influence on other people. And, 1 Corinthians 15:33, Paul said, do not be deceived, evil company corrupts good morals. And I heard a good explanation about that from someone. He said, just because you're around someone who drinks doesn't mean that you're going to start drinking. That's not what he's saying. He's saying it corrupts the way you see things. The morality there that's corrupted is your view of it. It softens. It softens you to the idea of it. So the more you're around something, the softer you become toward it. And that's not to suggest that we shouldn't have compassion on people, but it does warp our way of seeing life. And so we start thinking differently, and that can lead to all kinds of things. So it may not affect us in that sense, but it can affect us in other ways. We start thinking in different ways. So suddenly sin doesn't seem to be as bad as it should be seen, right? And I run into so many people, and I fight this in myself, who say, well, there's sin in my life now and then, and so it's going to be there from now on. So it's easy for people to say, well, it's just no big deal. It is a big deal, and we need to deal with it when we see it. And we can try to have compassion all we want to, but there comes a time when we have to stand up and say, no, this is not right, and we need to be able to do that. So anyway, that's what is. It helps us if we are facing it and we stand up and say, no, that's not right. then it helps to prevent that erosion from happening in our own selves. It also sin erodes the mission of the organization. It introduces ulterior motives, alternate motives and agendas. For example, when Achan was in the city, his motives started changing. It wasn't anymore, we're going to purify this place and offer everything up to God. It was, there's something really nice. I can take that for myself. That's right. So it's not going to be long till other people start seeing the same thing if they would have known what he was doing. And it also causes confusion about and among leadership, because we don't know where we're going anymore. Too many people are chasing different ideas in the congregation, that kind of thing. And another point here is that trusting and obeying God is the only way to have the unity of spirit that God expects us to have. We can't have the unity if we're chasing everything else. We have to be going in the same direction. And so unity has always been in the scriptures not a position that we're in. It's a process that we're a part of. It's an action word. We're pursuing something together. That's the idea of unity in the Bible. And it certainly has to do with agreeing with one another about things, but it's a lot more than just agreement. It's agreement in the process. As we're doing things, we're going in the same direction because we agree on these things. And if movement isn't happening, then there really is no unity. It's simply a facade. But when things start to move, we start really finding out what we think and what we believe, because things start happening, and we start then interjecting our own ideas of what we think is best. We're going to see very quickly, we need some work. We got to try to get everybody together on the same page, and that happens. That's the way life is, and the only way to really have that unity is to actually move forward. Okay, so this is shown by the constant demand for obedience. It's in the Bible. It's everywhere, and the only way, like I said, the only way you can have that unity is to obey, to step forward. It's also it's supported by the actions taken against Achan for his sin. We already talked about how that Achan's disobedience caused him to lose the next battle, Ai. That's in Joshua chapter 7, verses 1 through 5. This is how they were defeated. And in verse 5 it says, the men of Ai struck down about 36 men, for they chased them from the gate as far as Shebarim, and struck them down on the descent. Therefore the hearts of the people melted and became like water. So this is a defeat. It's only 36 people that were killed, and that's bad, but it wasn't like everyone was completely killed. But this is because of Achan's sin. And this is brought out in chapter 7, verses 10 and 11. The Lord said to Joshua when he was praying to God, he said, "Get up, why do you lie thus on your face? Israel has sinned, and they have also transgressed my covenant which I commanded them. For they have even taken some of the accursed things, and have both stolen and deceived, and they also put it among their own stuff." All right? So who's the they that he's talking about there? Achan. Why does he say they? His family was obviously involved as well, because the punishment extended even to his family. Even his livestock were killed in this situation. All right, so it's that. It also relates to the fact that who was the one that was being punished for Achan's sin? Everyone. Right. That's right. That's a lesson that we can learn, is sin doesn't just affect the person. It always affects other people around. Whether you realize it or not, it affects other people. You may not even know what the sin is, but it slowly starts to dilute the truth. It slowly starts to dilute attitudes, and things that we should have a strong stand on start to weaken over time, and that's simply because of our outlook, attitudes, that kind of thing. So there's a natural way, and there's also the sense of what God does, because he will punish a group of people for the sins of one person. This is evidence of that, right? So how were the Israelites guilty of what Achan did? It's a really good question, isn't it? Okay, it could be that other people saw him, which is very likely, saw him doing something with it. And hey, they didn't say anything. It's like they just noticed it and let it go. Could be that. Anything else? Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah, he got their attention. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I think it's a great teaching opportunity. So remember, he's still establishing a nation here. He's still trying to create a political people, and they had already spent 40 years in the wilderness, and they'd never had to face situations like they're facing now. And he's establishing early. Yeah. Right. He was still trying to hide it. Yeah. And then he was like, well, I might as well say it, right? He could have easily confessed earlier. And that's true. So I think that is part of the process here. He's teaching them an important lesson. What's the important lesson? Your sin affects other people. And suppose, we can suppose, I know, all day, but the people that died there at the feet of Ai, how many people was it there? 36 men. So they took 3,000 men, and 36 of them died. Is it possible that if they were attacking Ai, that those 36 men would have died whether they won or lost? Yeah. So people have said, well, listen, God killed 36 people because of Achan's sin. They died in the battle. They lost because they ran, right? They were afraid, and that was because of God's doing. But I don't know if we can necessarily say that they died because of that. The defeat came because of that. But either way, it's either here or there, because God's going to do what he knows is right. But it's something to think about. That's true. That's part of life. Yeah, that's right. Was the defeat in the way you think? Is this a case of what we call natural consequences of Achan's sin? The fact that Achan took some things and hid them, does that automatically lead to the defeat at Ai? I wouldn't think so. No. So my point in saying that is this is something that God did. This is not natural consequences, even though God could cause natural consequences to work through them. Yeah. Is that right? Are you talking about the Gibeonites in chapter 9? No. Well, yeah, chapter 7. Yeah, that's true. It doesn't say that they didn't inquire of the Lord, but It doesn't say that they did either. My thinking is they're sending the camp. Yeah, that's true. They would have asked. I don't know if every time they attacked, they had to go ask God if it was okay, though, because he told them to go and do it. But, I mean, that's a good point. If they had been asking God, maybe they should have made that a habit of, we're going to do it, let's see if God wants us to do it. Yeah, it definitely would have helped against the Gibeonites. Yeah, certainly. All right, good point. Okay, that could be that the people were deciding for him. Could be, and he may have been taking counsel, you know. Right. Okay, good thought. I hadn't thought about that, either of those things. So the account ended with the deaths of Achan and his family, even their animals. And so this taught Israel quite a few lessons. So here's some things to think about. Is it possible that we might have problems caused by private sins of members of the congregation here? I'm talking theoretically. Is it possible that we would have that? Of course it is. And that's a scary thought, that we could be hindered or hurt because of the sins of people who are hiding it, right? And like with Achan, it was pointed out that somebody probably saw him do something. We see things now and then that give us pause, that we are to ask questions, right? We're going to look. I don't think that we need to be like the Soviet Union with the police state, but we ought to ask questions for the benefit of that person and for the benefit of the group as a whole. So we have a responsibility to try. In what ways can disobedience by individuals affect the entire congregation? I know that opens it up to about anything, but what are ways that you can think of that would hurt? What are ways that we could be hurt because of the sin of other people in the congregation who are hiding things? Yeah, it definitely could hurt our reputation in the community, right? People will find out they know things, all right? Anything else? So it can lead to discouragement, right, certainly, because people may see things here and there, hear things, and it also just affects the way people behave. If you're hiding sin, you behave differently than if you're trying to deal with sin, right? There's a difference between pretending it's not there and actually dealing with it. I don't think that we necessarily have to go parading everything that we've ever done, but at the same time, we can't pretend that we have nothing in our lives that we're struggling with. And I think that's a negative thing. It's not healthy at all. Any other thoughts? Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So I don't want anything. I've heard people say this. I don't want anything to do with Church of Christ because I know some people in it. Well, every congregation, every church is going to have people in it that are going to have problems. But we don't want people to start saying, I don't want to be a part of that. Look at how they behave. We can hurt a lot of things that way. Yeah, right. Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of people, and oh, yeah, yeah. So the hypocrite accusation is one that is a big one, right? Well, we're all, to some degree, hypocritical in the sense that we're trying to promote truth, but none of us are perfect. But at the same time, I remember Johnny Ramsey one time said, some people tell me they don't want to go to church with the hypocrites. He said, well, you can just go to hell where they're all going to be then, if that's what the case, right? Why would you want to go there? The only hypocrites are not going to be in heaven. You want to be in heaven, so you get away from them. So you need to be with church, with the family of God, so that you can overcome that. And it's a challenge that we all face. Yeah, I mean, we all know that there are hypocrites, and sometimes we even know about things going on that people refuse to change. That's the way life works. But yeah, by their standards, and sometimes by this projected standard of, you're a church, you're supposed to be perfect, right? You're supposed to have perfect people in it. And all I can say is that there's no way that can be the case. Now, like I said before, there's a difference between pretending like you don't have anything wrong in your life, that's hypocritical, and dealing with the problems and the issues. Notice I didn't say you continue to do them thinking it's okay. I had a relative who her biggest contention was that she could sin as long as she was honest about it. She'd do whatever she wanted to do. At least I'm honest. That was her thing. I said, at least I'm honest about it. I'm like, no, that's not at least you're honest about it. You're still living in sin, but you think it's okay because you're openly talking about it. And of course, God wants us to get rid of that, right? And we can't just continue to live in sin and pretend like everything's okay with God as long as I talk about it and I confess it. Oh yeah, I'll do it, then I'll confess to God and it's okay. That kind of attitude is exactly the opposite of the way we should be about it. Yeah, Casey? Yeah.
Or for that matter, knowing that there are people that may be striving to do the right thing, but are still living in a state that's not safe. Like there does come a point where you have to make a choice, and it can create conflict and friction within the congregation.
Definitely.
Ultimately, create sides. I'm not going to say split, but create sides in that argument if it is not resolved.
Yeah, it's a major problem that we have to deal with, and it's not a constant issue, but it is something we have to be vigilant about, right? We have to beware and be careful, and that's where we have to pay attention, right? Like I said, I don't think that it's one of these things where I'm taking notes about everything you do. That's ungodly, in my opinion. But when we see people who are doing wrong, we need to go to them and talk about it. Not talk to everyone else about it, but go to them and say, I think this is something that you did. I want to talk about it. That's the way to resolve things, and it can be resolved that way very easily. So anyway, that's something that we certainly learned with that. So how can we work together to keep this from happening? I've already given some ideas, but what can you think of? What kind of attitudes and mindsets have to be here?
Sometimes we see it, and sometimes we don't see it, and sometimes we don't think others see it. And
yeah.
Being able to have that open dialogue, that open discussion, to realize what needs to change in your life, if you're willing to change it, will solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, that's right. And rooting out bitterness. All kinds of bad things come from bitterness. Yeah, that's right. So that's part of it. Talking to people directly. And not confronting. I know it's not easy to talk to people, and every time I've done it, I've always been afraid. But I've always been happy with what happened. Well, I shouldn't say always, but most of the time, I'm happy the way things resolve. Because especially in the congregation, we're all trying to get to heaven. We all want to be we're all on the same team, right? And that's not always something that we think about. And so all kinds of things can happen if we don't talk. But like you said, bitterness can come in and cause all kinds of problems. Hebrews chapter 12 says that quite a bit about that, and about when we go through suffering and pain and troubles, the easy thing to do is become embittered, and all of a sudden now everything else is negative, and the whole world's out to get me, can't be happy, that kind of thing. That's true. So how do we deal with people who are bitter? Let's put it that way. How do you dig out that root of bitterness? You can pray a lot about it. Yeah, I think that would be the first thing we should do. Yeah. Right.
That has to be, you have to, because, you were talking about secret sin, a lot of times secret sin causes division or confrontation because people want to hide it.
Yeah.
My person is supposed to make us angry or defensive.
Right.
And so when somebody points it out or we go to them, they become angry. And it's usually directed toward us, not the truth or God.
Mm-hmm.
Because they want to hide it and they don't want to change. And we have to be patient with that. We have to be understanding, praying through it. Work with it.
That's right. It takes time sometimes. You know, if you think about, if you've had things in your life you needed to change, and someone talked to you about it, or even if they didn't talk to you about it, you just made the decision, I need to change. We change immediately. We make the decision to change immediately, but how we do that from then on is difficult. It takes us a while sometimes to turn around and come back. It's like if you exit the highway, take the wrong exit, and you go 10 miles down the highway. If you repent, you change, okay, I'm going to go back to the highway. I realize I did wrong. It's going to still be a 10-mile trip back, right? So it's still going to take some time, and it doesn't mean it's going to take bukus of time, but you want to do it as quickly as possible, but sometimes it takes some effort. It takes time for your brain to change. It takes time for you to think differently. But other people talking to you can help you overcome that, encourage you to do what's best, and even checking in on each other. Hey, I know you've been having to struggle with this. How's it going? Right? A good thing to do. I think us having an atmosphere of openness is vital, that we need to be safe and we need to be secure enough to recognize that we can trust each other to talk about things. And I don't necessarily think it has to be publicly, although that may be more convenient, but we still need to be able to talk to each other and have people that we can confide in and discuss things, and who can come to us when we know that we're having difficulties, when they know we're having difficulties. Say, what's going on, right? We need that kind of accountability. All right, the other example here of not trusting God is that's Achan wasn't trusting God because he would rather do what he wanted to do. This is another example of not trusting God, and that's the treaty with the Gibeonites in Joshua chapter 9. That's how I mentioned before, said they were from a long way away. And in fact, in verse 4 of chapter 9, it says, they worked craftily and went and pretended to be ambassadors, and they took old sacks on their donkeys, old wineskins, torn and mended, old and patched sandals on their feet, and old garments on themselves. And all the bread of their provisions was dry and moldy. So this is what they just put on a big con show, and this is how Joshua was fooled. And it says, we have come from a very far country in verse 6. That's right. So the sin relates to Exodus chapter 23 and verses 30 through 33. And there's one other passage that says basically the same thing here. Chapter 23 and verse 30 says, little by little I will drive them out from before you. He's talking about the land of Canaan, until you have increased and you inherit the land. And I will set your bounds from the Red Sea to the sea, Philistia, and from the desert to the river. For I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you shall drive them out before you. You shall make no covenant with them, nor with their gods. They shall not dwell in your land, lest they make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you. All right, so now this is exactly what God said. Do not do this. Do not make treaties with people. And then they made a treaty with people, right? So was that sinful for them to do? Yes, it was. So, but is it the same kind of sin that Achan committed? No. Different type. Still sin, still wrong. It was error. We could say it that way. It was an error to do that. Of course, we know that. Sin is that's what sin is. It's an error. So Achan's sin was a deliberate, I'm going to hide this and nobody will ever know. And the other one was in full faith. They believed these people and they were fooled, right? Now, that doesn't mean that they're not accountable to that, does it? Was Eve fooled in the garden? Yes, she was tricked into doing what she did. She was still guilty. And so was Adam, who evidently wasn't tricked, but he just went in full force. So this is related to the sin. They were tricked, so it was not an intentional decision to sin, but they still found themselves doing it, right? And it wasn't a deliberate one. The deliberate sin, though, you could say, came back because of Joshua chapter 9 and verse 15. Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live, and the rulers of the congregation swore to them. Verse 14, sorry. The men of Israel took some of their provisions, but they did not ask counsel of the Lord. That's where the problem came. It's not a sin to make decisions in your life without asking God. That's not sinful. You can't imagine if every decision you ever made, you had to go to God in prayer and ask Him what to do. Should I get out of bed right now, or do I need to wait 10 minutes? My answer would always be 10 minutes later, right? You can't live like that. So it's not sinful not to go and ask, but the error came, looking back on it, they didn't ask God about this. Now, you would think that would be a really important one to ask, though, because they should have known not to make treaty with, and they were even worried about. So they were looking for evidence. The evidence to them was the moldy bread, the torn clothes, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, Marie? Right, that's a good point, that sometimes we think we know things that we don't actually know. And I was thinking about that this morning, kind of wandering around the inside here, it's a shame that people don't even think to ask the right questions. And we can't tell them what questions to ask because they have to think of the questions themselves. But them not thinking of it just drives you crazy sometimes. So anyway, that's true. We have the hubris, like you said, to think that we have everything already figured out. That's definitely a problem here. But looking back on it is easier to see. Obviously, they should have asked God. But in the moment, they seemed to have all the evidence they needed. Do we not see that in the religious world around us? I've got all the evidence I need. I hear great arguments from these different pastors and teachers and preachers, and they're telling me these different things, and I see it with my own eyes. I feel feelings when I'm in the service with them. It's got to be right. And then later on, how many times have you actually run into people who said, I had no idea that was in the Bible? Well, why didn't they know? Because they didn't seek God. They sought the opinions probably to make it easier for themselves to feel better about the decision that they wanted to make. I'm going to ask my preacher. Yeah, it's okay to get some insight, but your preacher, obviously, me, is not the Bible, and you can't trust. You can't put your eternal salvation on the sole word of one person. Only God can do that. Can fit that. So I don't want people basing their salvation on what I say. I want them to listen to what I say and dig in. Yeah. And mommy and daddy taught me this, or grandpa and grandma taught me this. I grew up learning this, and so it has to be that way. There's all kinds of things relate to that. So they deliberately didn't ask, and I say it's a sin, but it's one of those things. It's a judgment call when you ask, but it still should have been done. Were there any natural consequences to this treaty? Yes. In fact, pretty immediately, because as soon as they made the contract, this is a I forgot the name of the treaty. This is a treaty in which a superior nation makes a treaty with an inferior nation. And the treaty says the superior nation is going to protect and defend this inferior nation, but that inferior nation has to devote themselves to service of the greater nation. So they're going to be servants, woodcutters, this kind of thing. Especially when they found out Joshua made them woodcutters perpetually. So they had a situation where kings found out that they made a treaty with the Israelites, and they were mad, so they attacked the Gibeonites. And the Gibeonites sent word, we need your help. Now they were bound by treaty to go and help pagans who they didn't even want to be in that land to begin with. Did they honor that or not? They did. For the sake of their word, they honored it. So there are a lot of things here that we could talk about. And one of the things we could discuss is God expect us to keep our word if our keeping our word means we're not doing something else that God wanted? That's a really difficult question to ask, to answer. Our automatic response is no. So you have a situation where if you keep it, you're disobeying one thing. If you don't keep it, you're disobeying another. Keep your word, right? Especially when it comes to this is the Lord's name. In fact, we can see later on Saul did something to the Gibeonites, wiped them out, and Israel was being punished for sin, and come to find out they were being punished because Saul wiped out the Gibeonites, contrary to the treaty that they had made. So God himself said, no, you can't violate your treaty. So it's a difficult situation. And now they're there, and they put themselves in this pickle, in this dilemma. Have you ever put yourselves in a dilemma? I don't know how many times I've done that. You just do the best you can to get through it, right? Find a way out and ask God to help, and he will. So anyway, all right, we'll start this again on Wednesday. Actually, there's some things I wanted to talk about very quickly. I know the bell just rang. I have some application activities for the week. If you're interested, at the beginning of each day, identify sin or weaknesses in your life and notice the nature of it and your attitude toward it. Identify difficulties and problems and begin working to see where these might be a natural consequence of actions in the past. Because sometimes we put ourselves in a position where we're suffering because of things that we've done. Confess any sins that you see yourself involved in and pray about it, and then decide to change, and then decide how you're going to do it. Those are things I would recommend for this week to just try to practice in the mornings or at night before you go to bed. All right. Well, thank you very much for